Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Beyond Hourly podcast, hosted by Bentham IMF. As one of the world's most experienced commercial litigation funders, Bentham IMF has invested nearly 2 decades into providing litigation finance and investment capital to plaintiffs and law firms. We offer law firms and their clients a risk-sharing partnership and a proven record of success as a leading global litigation funder. Episodes of this podcast can be found on our website, www.benthamimf.com, and on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. I'm your host, Sarah Tsou. I'm an investment manager and legal counsel at Bentham's New York office. Prior to joining Bentham, I spent over 12 years as an intellectual property lawyer at Kirkland & Ellis LLP. My role at Bentham involves assessing investment opportunities in the IP space and beyond, and serving as a strategic resource for the parties we fund throughout the funding relationship. We're back today with the second half of our interview with Steve Cherney, a partner at Quinn Emanuel. Steve has over 25 years of high-profile patent litigation under his belt, and he's won some of the most important patent cases in the last decade. In addition to his private practice, Steve also serves as a lecturer at the University of Chicago Law School and is a former member of the District of Delaware IP Advisory Subcommittee. I'm also proud to say that I had the privilege of working closely with Steve for a number of years while we were both at Kirkland & Ellis. If you missed the first portion of this interview, I encourage you to listen in for Steve's insights on the current landscape for patent litigation and damages, and also how he came to hold the record for collecting the most money from a single patent infringement judgment ever, more than $2 billion. Today's episode delves into when and why Steve's firm, Quinn Emanuel, shares risk with clients, how litigation funding has impacted his practice, and the ways that it's benefiting the legal system on the whole. With that, let's jump back into the interview. Quinn is known for its willingness to share risk with its clients by entering into alternative fee arrangements. What do you think sets Quinn apart in this regard?
I think probably we're a little more creative than most, and that doesn't mean that our competitors aren't creative or sophisticated law firms. It's probably a bit of the business model. Quinn is, I think, the largest firm dedicated purely to litigation or dispute resolution. And so as a result, our business is being a little bit more creative in that area. And also that's how we generate our income. So, other firms, like a lot of traditional white shoe firms, litigation is a bit of more support. And that doesn't mean they're not great litigators or it's more balanced. But for us, because all of our business comes from litigation, it behooves us to be a little bit more creative in terms of working with our clients to figure out ways to generate value for them and us out of litigation.
And alternative fee arrangements generally mean that you, as the attorney, are sharing risk with your clients. Do you think that's important?
I think it's important to have as an option. I mean, each client is different. Some clients, are conservative and they like to have, I'll pay you your rate. We have plenty of clients who pay, rates and they're more conservative about it. Other clients, for reasons, for example, having to do with like their cost balance sheet, just in terms of the internal views of things. So it's not a matter of conservatism. It's just a matter of being able to allocate costs at certain times. It can be very helpful for us to share the risk going forward, either alone or with a funder like Bentham. And for others, they would never even get into the courthouse otherwise, and they do have valuable claims. And so for them, of course, it's probably the most important for us to be able to do alternative fee arrangements and to be creative in doing it, because otherwise there's somebody out there who has a claim that's valuable. I think we saw over the last 10, 15 years in terms of all the litigation relating to the financial crisis. We were very creative. I mean, it was a little bit before I got to Quinn, so it's a bit hearsay. But I think there was a lot of creativity there that enabled a lot of people to get their claims adjudicated in a fair way, having sophisticated counsel represent them, because people were willing to work with them and be flexible in terms of the way they allocated risk.
Do you think litigation funding has enabled your clients to retain you as their attorney where they otherwise wouldn't be able to?
Yeah, I think that's clear, whether it's me or any or other people at some very good firms. I mean, in the past, people's choices were either pay straight rates or go to a contingency fee lawyer. And I think that there was a perception that sometimes contingency fee lawyers were maybe a little bit less at the top of their game. Some of them were very good, but also their incentives were very different. So if you were just doing pure contingent fee work, there was a matter of cash flow coming into the firm.
Sure.
You knew you had to wait a couple of years at least to get some money until you get a settlement. And so what happened was it would drive the lawyers there to try to do as little as possible to get some amount of money in fast. And in those cases, the plaintiff probably wasn't getting the best representation. Now, the incentives have changed a little bit. When I work with, or other people work with, a litigation funder, it enables us to go for the long haul, meaning that we're not worried about trying to get $20,000 now or putting 3 hours worth of work in. We're not incentivized. We're incentivized because our costs are being met often, and we're incentivized to work really hard for a good return at the end, which we will share with the funder, but by hedging it a little bit so that we're not bearing all the risk and essentially the near-term cost of having no money coming in. I think what it's done is led to better lawyers being willing to represent clients who in the past would have had to choose either contingency fee lawyers or nobody.
That makes sense, and it's great to hear. Patent cases seem like such a natural fit for creative alternative fee arrangements like what Quinn can provide and litigation funding. How do you think litigation funding has impacted the patent litigation landscape?
I think for the same reasons as other landscapes, I imagine. I mean, as I said at the very beginning, I'm pretty much a patent trial lawyer, so I can't speak to others. But I have to say that, I think it's opened up the courthouse to various claimants who before, would have gone to a contingent fee law firm. So I think the quality of lawyering has gotten better for a lot of plaintiffs as a result of being able to use litigation funding to fund. I think also it's brought a certain level of quality and discipline because in the past, lawyers are lawyers. We're not business people. And I think some of us try to do our best. And the litigation funders have, I think, maybe an unintended or unexpected benefit is that they do some very sophisticated underwriting of the cases. And so in some respects, the whole system, I think, is benefiting, certainly in the patent world, of having people take a hard look. And it tends to become a feedback loop where before you might have a lawyer taking a flyer on a case that probably shouldn't be in there. Now, when they're working with someone like Bentham, or other funders, you have to get through a process where you have to kind of justify that. And so it's much higher than your traditional Rule 11 basis. Now you're trying to really make a case, maybe even more than most companies do internally, because you have this underwriting process. And I think it's probably forced people to do, in a lot of cases, a lot more substantive analysis early and make sure their case is better from a get-go. So I think it's helped in that respect. And like I said, I think I think for some companies, it's helped them bring claims that might not be barred by the ability to pay, but just by the flow at the time, where people just don't want to have on their books X amount of litigation, costs if they can spread out over a number of years, even though it's a big company that can afford to pay, just the difference in where those costs show up can make a big difference to people in terms of share value and other things that they focus on. So, I think that's probably true of every type of litigation, though I don't know what's unique to patent litigation, but certainly it's true.
Sure. So that's a benefit that litigation funding can provide to companies like the ones that you've represented.
I think so.
What do you think law firms should be doing with respect to litigation finance?
I think they should be learning about it. I was surprised how little I knew. If you asked me 2-3 years ago, I think about litigation finance, I'd had 1 or 2 experiences with it, but didn't know that much. I know a lot more now. And I would just tell people to look at it with an open mind and come talk to folks like you, Sarah, and learn about it. It's a great service. I think people need to kind of, put aside any preconceptions about litigation funding they may have that somehow it's, some unsavory way of going forward. Whether a company, it's like any other type of thing. It's like, it's a business. And like I said, I think it actually has benefited, lawsuits in general by putting some additional discipline on the lawyers and the plaintiffs who work with litigation funders to make sure their cases are meritorious and make sense from an economic perspective. And I'm not sure everybody out there really understands that. I think a lot of people have ideas about what litigation funding is, but I don't think they really understand it.
And do you think that as more and more law firms are learning about litigation funding, that they're understanding the model and any of those misconceptions you discussed?
Yeah, I think, certainly, you see a lot more discussions of it. I saw recently an article where different law schools are starting to teach it. I'm certainly going to raise some of these issues at the University of Chicago, which would seem to be the most natural of all places where I teach. Again, law isn't an island. Law intersects with business and economics. I know that sounds very University of Chicago,
Yes.
but in this regard, it does. And I think the more economic rationality that's brought to the process, the better it is for everybody. And so, yeah, I think more people understand it now, and I think the more they do, and it's not like you're forced to do it. And especially, I don't think everybody understands, for example, how many litigation funders are non-recourse, meaning that this is not a loan to pay the fees. It is a risk sharing, and so just like contingent fee law, is just a sharing between, or essentially the law firm taking on all the risk. Now you just have someone who's willing to hedge that a little bit and make it easier for everybody to take risk when it makes economic sense to take risk. People like Bentham are not putting their money where it doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that you guys, like any other investment, always are right. But involving litigation funder, I think it opens opportunities, but it also, I think it helps everybody do a better job of making good choices.
Well, it's clear that you're very sophisticated when it comes to understanding these types of financing. What do you suggest that clients look for in a funder?
It's funny. One indication that funding is on the rise, probably like any other newer businesses, that I get approached by lots and lots of funders. I get emails, and you meet with people because why not? It's like anything else. It's business, and competition benefits us and our clients. Some funders are sophisticated. Again, that word's probably getting overused, but it's like anything else. It's like some are a little bit fly-by-night-ish, perhaps. Some are in the middle. And so I think you're always better off going with the people who are smart. I think you'll get better feedback. I think they'll do a better job of helping you understand the true value of your case. If you're a plaintiff, you really don't want to, as much as you emotionally want to go forward and you think it's going to be a big win, it's good to work with an honest funder who is really analyzing the issues and is willing to give you the feedback and say, look, we just don't see the value here, as opposed to just, going headlong, spending 2 or 3 years of time, the law firm's money, et cetera, going after something that probably if they had gone through the process that a funder might put them through, then maybe they wouldn't do it. And so like I said, like anything else, I think you're better off going, for people who are higher caliber, where the people that work there, you can see have the experience to add to the process. Of course, if you're dead set on doing something and those people will give you money, I guess then go talk to people who are a little bit more willing to take risk. But it's like anything else. It's like banks. There's some banks who are conservative and sensible, and there's some that probably are a little more risk taking. And so I guess depending on the need for your clients and your need for willingness to take on risk, that's how you should determine which funder you should go to. I personally prefer to go to the ones who are a little bit more sensible and a little bit less gambling.
Well, that's great to hear. So just to wrap up, what's an actionable takeaway you'd like to recommend to our listening audience?
Yeah, I guess, given that the people who are listening to this are people who are interested in litigation funding, I guess the actual takeaway is that even if you think maybe it's a case that you pay for by yourself, or say you're a defendant. I think a lot of people don't realize that defendants can also get litigation funding because, they're thinking it's only just about percentage of awards. I think, given the audience and given who I'm talking to, probably an actual takeaway is if you're going to get into litigation, it can be a long process. It can be expensive. It doesn't cost you anything to go talk to people like you. And so why not? It's you might learn something, and you might learn something if you're a defendant about how maybe a way you can share the risk in terms of legal fees and only have to pay more if you win. And of course, if you're a plaintiff, you may learn a lot more. You may be under the misconception that essentially you're going to pay back a loan or not understand all the different structures that are possible. So given that this is a litigation funder podcast, I guess the actionable takeaway, other than, give me a call if you've got a patent litigation, would be to come talk to you guys.
So I'd like to talk more about how you think litigation funding could help clients who have some defensive cases. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's not intuitive. I think people only think about litigation funding as if it's just a matter of, in some respects, investing, gambling on big judgments. But, for every plaintiff, there's a defendant, and those people also have many of the same issues in terms of, costs on their balance sheet, hedging risk, especially, there are companies who get sued all the time and where litigation costs mount up. And, where if you win, you'd be more than happy to pay essentially like a success bonus. And if you lose, you're probably happy to pay less than the full amount. And so I don't think people realize that you can do something like structure a defendant's case where, you have X amount of fees. You sit there and work out what a success would be or what different types of success it would be. And if, for example, the litigation funder, make it possible to get better counsel for them, part of that, they don't pay the full price for having better counsel. So for example, I can go forward and maybe I can only afford counselor X to defend me. And that may mean that I'm more likely to lose a big judgment against me. I don't want that, but I also can't bear the risk or the actual payments of paying, 2 or 3 years of expensive litigation bills. I could face it that way and just pick what I think is lesser counsel. And, I don't mean to be judgmental, but, a lesser track record or experience. And those are my choices. Or I can go to someone like you guys and we could work out a deal where essentially that in order to avoid the risk of, for example, losing $200 million, if I can improve my chances of not losing $200 million by 10%, that's worth a lot of money to me, $20 million worth of expected value. And so if I can get that extra 10% by hiring better counsel, maybe I'd be willing to pay some additional fee to you guys if I win. And if I lose, I haven't had to pay the entirety of the counsel fees to lose. So, I'm not sure it's coming through clearly, but again, to me, the benefit is that it's just another situation where I can benefit and probably get better representation and also hedge some of the risk and maybe smooth out some of the fees if I get a funder involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've represented many clients who have both plaintiff side and defense side cases. And I think it's interesting that a lot of those companies I've found have not, realized the benefits of litigation funding for their defensive cases. So what you just discussed kind of folds in well with something we offer called hybrid funding, where our funding can be used for any cases, whether on the plaintiff side or defendant side in the portfolio, and our recoveries from the plaintiff side. So where there are valuable plaintiff's claims, we're happy to fund that portfolio of cases and can be very beneficial for the defense side cases for the company.
And what you said actually reminded me of something else. I think that a lot of lawyers, companies don't realize that they can have a relationship with a funder that is not a single one-shot case. That, people who are regular visitors to the courthouse, whether it's lawyers like us or companies, can make arrangements with folks like Bentham, almost like an insurance policy in some respects, but not insurance, but essentially help them deal with the episodic nature of litigation and the fact that you can get a big hit all of a sudden in terms of fees and costs, all that, and then things go. And then so if you're a frequent visitor to the courthouse, either as a defendant or as a plaintiff, you can work out, from my understanding, pretty reasonable or interesting structures that allow you to smooth over those episodic bumps. So it's not just a matter of, I have a litigation, now I'll go for my one-time visit to visit you, Sarah.
Right.
It's that you can make arrangements that cover a portfolio of cases spanning different types of legal areas or technologies in my area or whatever, and such that a company might benefit at that point by saying, okay, I know statistically that I'm going to be getting sued X amount of times over the next 5 years. They could work something out with a funder that makes things a lot more predictable. And in my experience, companies as well as law firms really like predictability.
Right.
And so they can essentially turn the episodic, unpredictable nature of litigation into something that just becomes a predictable, smoothed out cost. And of course, you guys get something out of it as well, but they get that level of predictability.
Mm-hmm. Budget stability is important to everyone.
I think so.
Okay, well, Steve, I want to thank you again for appearing on our Beyond Hourly podcast and sharing your perspective. As I mentioned at the outset, episodes of the Beyond Hourly podcast can be found on our website, www.benthamimf.com, and on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. We'll be back soon with another episode focused on advancements in legal services that drive economic value for law firms and the clients they serve. Until then, I'd like to thank our audience for listening in and invite you to follow up with me, Sarah Tsou, at stsou@benthamimf.com and provide any feedback or ideas you have for topics we should cover. Thank you and be well.